right in the text of the Second Amendment, it says that it is for well-regulated militias. It says that it is for the people as a collective to democratically resist tyranny. And we know this is true both because of the history surrounding the Second Amendment, the types of things that the Founding Fathers said they were concerned about. It's so funny when people claim to be just following the clear intent of the Constitution and then completely ignoring every evidence we have about what the Founding Fathers actually meant when they wrote those words. A conservative will look at the Second Amendment and say, this is for well-regulated militias, and they'll try to argue that those words are on the page for no reason at all. They'll try to argue that the Second Amendment specifies well-regulated militias for literally not a single reason, because what the amendment actually protects, according to conservatives, is the right for lone wolf terrorists to shoot up schools, the right for individual people to own weapons of war, and individually mentally unstable people to massacre their fellow citizens. That is not what the Founding Fathers meant, and it's a good thing too, because that doesn't work. You do not have a right to be able to murder your fellow citizens. All the evidence we have, all of it, shows that when there is armed resistance that is not preceded by democratic resistance and democratic institution building, it fails to produce a free country. Even in the rare instances where it does succeed, it produces a dictatorship like Cuba or the Soviet Union. You can't talk about an individual right to bear arms when that is not protected in the Constitution, and it also makes no sense. Because if you truly believed, and this is how you know, by the way, the conservatives are full of crap, because if you truly believed that there is an individual right to bear arms, then you believe that the Constitution guarantees you the right to a rocket launcher, to an anti-tank gun, to an anti-aircraft weapon, because all of those are obviously arms. And the Second Amendment is so clear, right, according to conservatives, the Second Amendment is so clear that the state cannot infringe on your right to own weapons of war. It cannot infringe on your right to own guns. Or even more broadly, I mean, arms technically is a broader class of category than just guns. You should be able to own landmines. You should be able to own nuclear weapons, because all of those things are arms. All of those things are things that you could hypothetically use to defend yourself against a tyrannical government. And yet conservatives don't argue this. Why? Because it is completely batshit insane. Obviously, individual people should not be allowed to own weapons of war. Obviously, you should not be owning a weapon meant to murder people unless it is registered with a democratic organization, such as a state militia, such as the National Guard. That is what the Founding Fathers both said they were protecting, put in the text of the amendment that they were protecting, and clearly meant from historical context. And if they hadn't meant that, you know what? Then we should change the Constitution. If they really did mean something else, that is an argument not for allowing personal ownership of guns, but for changing the Constitution, because the Founding Fathers also put right in the Constitution a method for changing it, because they knew they would make some mistakes. And we have made use of that method many times since then. And that's not ignoring the intent of the Constitution. That is the intent of the Constitution, is to change and evolve with the times. But fortunately, in this case, we actually don't need to amend the Constitution. You know why? Because the Second Amendment says specifically it is the right of the people as a collective, as part of a well-regulated militia, to own firearms. It is not the right of individual lone wolf terrorists to murder our kids. And if you believe, as many conservatives say, that individual lone wolf terrorists have a God-given right to go into a church or a synagogue or a temple and murder all the kids in there, that is literally sacrilegious. Ask yourself how you think you are not going to hell for that. That is not an individual right that you have. Now, if you want to join the National Guard, if you want to join your state's militia, and you want to resist the tyranny of the Trump administration by supporting your state's efforts to curtail ICE, to stop mass deportations, to protect habeas corpus, then great. You should do that. You really should. If you took the founding fathers and you found a way to portal them in to our current world, they would honestly be shocked at the things that conservatives claim that they were in favor of and they supported. I think it's good that we talk about areas in which the founding fathers had failings, because there's still issues that we're struggling with today. And we need to be able to face those demons. But the founding fathers were remarkably progressive, not just for their time, but even in the context of the current political debate, the founding fathers were progressive. The founding fathers would have been more progressive than Donald Trump. In fact, they were just straight up more progressive than Donald Trump. And that is a huge indictment of our modern society, because we are supposed to make moral progress over time. We are supposed to become better and better. And the fact that Donald Trump is actually a step backwards from like the 1790s. Again, I realize that there was some messed up shit going on in the 1790s, but the fact, and I think this is literally true, that Donald Trump is actually a step backwards from what the founding fathers were doing in the 1790s is a huge indictment of us, because we should have gotten better since then. The Declaration of Independence reads that all men are created equal. But right now, in fact, we have all men are created equal, except for black people and Native Americans. And if the Know Nothing's getting power, it'll read all men are created equal, except for, black people, Native Americans, Catholics, and Jews. That's exactly what's happening right now. That's exactly what's happening to our country right now. All men are created equal, except for all the people I don't like. Those people are created less than, and I have a right to jail them with no warrant. And if you want to resist that tyranny, then great. Please be my guest. Please do that. But you're not going to do it as a lone wolf terrorist. That's not how this works. That never works. Sometimes people ask me, well, don't you own a gun because the government is like so scary right now? And the truth is, actually, I do own a gun. I didn't for a long time because owning a gun is actually quite dangerous. Even just as an individual person, owning a gun makes you more likely to be both a victim of a crime or to be accidentally injured yourself. But recently I did purchase a gun. And that's not in contrast, by the way, with what I'm saying right now. Imagine a world in which some countries have nuclear weapons. Okay, let's say that Ukraine had nuclear weapons and they gave them up, and so now they got invaded by Russia. Well, the next time Ukraine has a chance to get nuclear weapons, they're probably going to get them. And it's not that Ukraine has a God-given right to be able to nuke people, but it's that in the context of an extremely violent society which does not respect rule of law, sometimes it does make sense to protect yourself. But that isn't an endorsement of that way of organizing society. That is an indictment of the fact that we have not made countries safe. For some people, it probably does make sense to own a personal firearm, simply because the risk of disorganized political violence is so high, and also just disorganized violence in general. But here's the thing. That doesn't mean that this is the best we can do. This is a prisoner's dilemma type situation. Cars have a legitimate use besides just murdering people and animals. Like, cars are useful for things, and we still require registration. Why? Because it's dangerous to own a car. It's a privilege. Even though cars are actually useful for things beyond murder, we still require license and registration because we recognize they are dangerous. License, registration, insurance. Same thing for guns. Okay, you want to own a firearm, fine. Register it with your state militia. Okay, that you have that. Now you're part of the well-regulated militia, at least in theory. And you can get insurance on it so that if somebody murders somebody else using your firearm because you were careless, or you murder someone else using your firearm because you're a jerk, then there's consequences. And we recognize the government has a legitimate interest in keeping people safe in every other area, except for some reason when it comes to guns, because there's been a huge burst of propaganda. And the reason that propaganda exists is not to protect our individual freedoms, but rather to protect the ability of far-right terrorists, which is about 80% of domestic terrorism is actually far-right, and it's to protect the ability of those far-right terrorists to scare democratic lawmakers into not standing up to Donald Trump.